All right, so Payton, welcome. First time. Excited
Thank
to
you.
excited to have you. Oh, and Tara, yeah, your first time with us too.
First
Woo.
timer.
Yeah,
Woohoo!
we were Cheryl and I were just joking about Tara being a junior podcaster in training, and so we're gonna get her up to speed, and Payton being our special guest. I feel like in the '80s on the TV shows, they'd be like special guest appearance.
Yeah.
Uh,
Like on the Love
But
Boat.
yeah. Oh, yeah, that's great. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to find our cruise director who keeps us entertained. Um, so we wanted to bring Peyton on because one of our newest products is eBooks,
Mhm.
and we're pretty excited about eBooks. I think it gives us a little bit more flexibility than we were finding with tip sheets.
Definitely.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
it's so what's it? Go ahead, Peyton.
I was going to say we started with the juvenile justice ebook. That's our first ever ebook. We partnered with a public defender's office in Pennsylvania, in a county in Pennsylvania, to work on this document because Christina ran across them in a webinar, and she thought they just like boiled down the juvenile justice system and the things parents need to know really well. So we started with that ebook, and I loved that we could like expand upon things because the tip sheet space is very precious. It's like we can't have like an extra period takes away a space somewhere else. So I love the ebooks. So we can make them interactive, and people can click and to define things, make them more accessible to different reading levels and things like that. So our next tip sheet or our next ebook, I got to get used to that, is on helping your child develop and nurture healthy friendships. Very excited about.
Nice. I will say I like the ebook, Peyton. I've shared it with some of the families I work with who are
Love
having
it.
some juvenile justice issues, and I love the interactiveness of it. I do.
Excellent.
I like to click while I read.
I agree.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like the page turning. I will say though, it all
Yeah.
really comes down to content. You
Mhm.
know, it you could have a pretty format, but if you don't have that great content, then that's what makes a big difference. And I will say that when I heard the county of Pittsburgh's Allegheny County's juvenile public defender's office. I don't know what their title is off the top of my head. When I heard them in the webinar, they were really telling stuff like that you would maybe tell to your neighbor if like you were a public defender, or you would, if you were an attorney, you would tell to like a friend. Like, yeah, there's like really probably no reason to go down and talk to the police if they call you. Like, they don't need you to tell you stuff, to tell them stuff. They already know. They're looking for you to tell on yourself. So I just loved the way they were kind of given that inside information. And let's be honest, as parents, we don't have extra money sitting around to go hire an attorney, or, you know, we may not have time to consult an attorney if something happens over the weekend or whatever. And I think it's natural for people to think, I don't have anything to hide, so I'm going to go talk to them. So I think that it really comes down to content. And so Peyton is here to kind of share with us a little bit about what she's learned, maybe explain to us how we go about grabbing some of that good information to put into an ebook. But we already have like it's funny because Peyton, originally when you were working on the friendship tip sheet, it just like evolved. It's our like long, it's more like the friendship book. It's
Yeah.
6 pages.
Yeah.
it?
It's 6 p. We found that topic to just be so full of those insider tips that you would share with your neighbor and then everything. Once we found one thing, we were like, oh, this is kind of more towards older children. And then we started finding more tips that were geared towards older children. And then the same thing with younger children. So that tip sheet kind of was a snowball. It just kept getting bigger and bigger. So I'm very excited for it to transition into an ebook and give it the space that it needs. It's always wanted.
So Peyton, what was one thing that really kind of maybe jumped out at you as a tip that you were like, oh yeah?
I
Was there
thought
one thing?
there was a bunch of, I highlighted a couple ones to bring up during the podcast, but I really liked the one to start off with about teaching your children not only how to identify healthy friendships, but also unhealthy ones, and explaining to them that like friends don't put you in dangerous situations, friends don't make you risk things, friends don't try and get you in trouble. So I thought that was a really a good tip to maybe start talking about the
And I think that goes back to when you were interviewing Rick Lavoie for the blog and the story that he shared. I don't know if you want to share that.
Oh yes, he was sharing that his wife Janet was a principal, or I can't remember the title she was in during the story, but she said that a mom and a little boy came in and to the school she was at, and she asked the little boy how many friends he had. She said 6, and or he said 6, and the mom was behind him and shook her head no. And then she asked the mom later on, and she was like, "That's just 6 boys that aren't mean to him. It's just like the 6 kids in his class that don't bully him."
Wow.
So that was really tough stuff.
That's impactful. And I think in this day and age of hearing so many terrible bullying stories, it is important that tip that you pointed out about a friend that's not going to encourage you to do negative things or get involved in behaviors that would be harmful, because a lot of the families that I work with, they talk about the fact that their kid wasn't always like this, but they wanted to be accepted by friends, and so that's what got them, into certain behaviors. So it is important. I think a big tip for me is model to your children, what a friend might look like, what are things you look in a friend. I know I've asked my daughter what she looks for in a friend many times through the years. And as she lists the things like someone I can talk to easily, someone who accepts me for me, whatever the case may be, okay, well, is that what you present to a friend? Is that what you would represent to a friend? And then what can we work on together to make sure that you would, represent that to a friend?
Yeah,
I love that.
That kind of like ties into the second tip I wanted to bring up, which we could always go back to the first one. But I really loved the insight someone had about not only having a conversation about what your child wants in a friend, but also what they bring to a friendship, and highlighting their strengths and showing them that like this is a really great quality in you, which we try and do in like all of the stuff we create. We try and show that like the child isn't just their mental health challenge, that they're also this incredible kid. So I love that you brought that up.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tara.
I was just going to say, in thinking about this, and the tip sheet is broken down this way, and I really appreciate it that it's by age group. And I think that's so critical because, when the kiddos are in elementary school, you have a lot more control over who they're engaging with, how you can kind of help them navigate those relationships more directly than you can now that my girls are in middle school and high school. It really does become about you kind of taking that back seat and helping them stay in the guardrails. But you really have to learn how to transition, I feel like, from that, setting up the play dates, when they're really young, you're there, you're listening, you're paying attention to what is going on, and you can coach them directly. Now you're not there all the time, and you just have to figure out a different style for getting them to talk to you, first of all, when they're teenagers. But then, being that sounding board where you're not telling them, you help them, you're just helping them figure it out. And I feel like that's been something I've had to really figure out, how to active listen and not, sorry, I'm getting dark here, and not jump in and try to fix the situation for them. It's that concept of you're in the hole with them and you're trying to help them figure out a way to get out of the hole. You're not the one dragging them out now, if that makes sense. So
I like that. That's a good point. I am definitely a helicopter parent. Always, always trying to be around and listening and see what. But you're right. As they transition into the older years, they don't want that. I can get away with it with my 8-year-old, but with the 15-year-old, not so much. So it is true to try to have those conversations and and, like you said, effectively leave them to making wise choices in friendships and relationships, and like what to look out for, because we won't always be there. And it
Mhm.
that brought to mind online social media and all of that, which is like the primary way the even the younger kids now communicate with friends and make friends. And it's so scary to me because it's like, who are they really talking to, you know?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I've been lucky, even when my kiddos were like a bit younger, and were just starting in like maybe social media. A lot of them would, like my son put me on Snapchat. It was like, oh, and he's like, no, here, I created a Snapchat, account for you. The only people that I use it with are like my kids, my nephew. I'm like, I do not need to be on Snapchat, other than the filters, which by the way are really fun.
I was gonna
Um,
say, the
yeah,
filters are fun.
right,
It's so
because
funny. Our old producer Brewer, he did ban our mom from Snapchat. He said you can be on everything else. Snapchat's not going off.
Price
Hey, she brings it
priceless.
up, and she's like, "I'm not allowed on Snapchat." Brewer told me so.
Oh,
I mean, who doesn't want to see what they would look like, old or without any
Mhm.
teeth, or, like,
or with
um,
perfect skin. Come on.
right,
Mhm.
Mhm.
right.
Seriously.
Okay. Yeah.
Ooh.
There's that, I definitely encourage parents to get on the social media apps that their children are on, because, it's sort of something to talk about, poke around. It it may turn out to be a giant time suck, but it's a really great way of knowing what's happening with your children, or what they could potentially be exposed to. I know that there have been places that have done studies, or they've done like research, and created a persona of a child, like maybe a 13-year-old girl. And they talked about in certain platforms within moments, they were starting to get improper direct messages from people. So it is good as a parent to kind of know the ins and the outs. And it can be something for you to talk to your child about. You do see a lot on TikTok of like, parents doing funny dances with their kids. So that could be a bonding kind of thing. It's always cute to watch like the dads do the dances with their daughters, but
Mhm.
in-person friendships for children can be really challenging. Depending upon where you live, there may not be any children in walking distance for your family. There could be, even if you live in an area where there's a lot of kids around, sometimes you get like the neighborhood in group, and if your child doesn't fit in there, that that can really smart. And Cheryl, I get it as a you know, identifying yourself as a helicopter parent. Sometimes there's reasons why we need to do that, to kind of keep our kiddos safe until we know that they're okay, and then maybe, back off a little bit. Do you have any tips for getting your son out there? I know that you homeschool your youngest. Do you have any tips for getting him out there and giving him some opportunities to interact and create some friendships?
Absolutely. At this point in his life, like one of the ladies was mentioning earlier, I'm setting up play dates and planning things to get him to interact. And I think it's important too. He's 8 years old, but a couple of his closest friends, people he calls best friends now, are older than him. They're more teenagers and stuff. And I was like that as a child, so I'm totally fine with that, as long as it's, positive influence the older kid. Um, but it does take some creativity. It does take maybe coming out of my comfort zone. I'm not a big fan of like Sky Zone and Free Fall and places like that, the ick factor, but he loves it. And that's where a lot of the kids want to set up play dates and stuff. And the moms are like, meet us here. Okay, I'll bring the Lysol. But it's the sacrifices we have to make, right, to help our kids build friendships. So that I think is really important at this point for him, being proactive and setting things up, setting the stage for him to be able to make those connections.
And I think that's one of our tips that we talk about is a way to expand your child's social circle of looking beyond
Mhm.
maybe age and other places besides school.
Yeah. Yeah, like not being feeling stuck in your school, your neighborhood, or your age range, to kind of widen their net of friends.
Right.
I
And
think
my son is homeschooled, so that's a big part of
Mhm.
why I do have to be more creative in finding outlets for him, social outlets.
it's a great opportunity too if you're like your child has kind of like some obscure interest like oh I love trains, if you could find like those hobbyists who may be adults and as a parent you may want to kind of linger in the background, but there's nothing wrong with them supervised being friends with other age groups, if they enjoy cooking, maybe they take a cooking class or, whatever. Tara, did your girls do uh like sports or organized kind of activities that had to do with school or the community?
So they tried out a bunch of different things. They were in dance for a little bit, and it just evolved over time. And both of them ended up with in cheer, and they both really clicked with cheer, resonated with it, and sorry, I don't know why I keep going dark here. But then my older daughter, the one that has the anxiety, the social anxiety, she then um didn't want to be involved after a few years. She didn't want to be seen. And the good thing was she did keep friendships from being in cheer. And I was going to say that I think that having friends outside of school and that normal everyday school routine is so beneficial for kids that might struggle socially. They um, just need a safer space to engage. And it just gives them that chance to not worry about the typical stressors of the day and the things that might, make them school avoidant. Um, but the cheer aspect was really great in terms of widening that friendship net.
Yeah, that's
I like
probably
that.
a really good option is especially
Mhm.
nowadays and especially as your kids get older when they're younger, friendships are just born from proximity.
Mhm.
Your kiddos may be friends. They're going to be friends maybe with family. So, their cousins, if their cousins are in the same age group and, if you're close to each other, the kids in the neighborhood. But as they get a
Right.
little bit older, and especially now when you could use social media to keep friendships that maybe you met at summer camp or the
Right.
friends in grandma's neighborhood when you went out of state to visit grandma for the week, you could kind of keep those friendships. I think that's also a nice option for families um to keep an eye on and encourage.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a good point because I think through the pandemic, that was a lot
Mm,
very tough for a lot of young people. But I
Hmm.
know myself as a mom, I learned Zoom, FaceTime, so many of those virtual options are great. I mean, I've planned Zoom parties for my little guy, and literally they've spent an hour
Oh, yeah.
just doing filters and
Yeah.
laughing and playing. We've done Play-Doh virtually, made pizza virtually with friends that we made through the pandemic in Texas and Jamaica, West Indies, like all over the place. And periodically
Oh,
now
cool.
we're all outside a lot more, but we still hop on, and they can,
Mhm.
let the kids see each other connect dancing. The mom would put a video on and everybody be dancing and cracking up. So it's
Yeah.
true that it helped us to understand that linkages could be maintained or even established despite not having close proximity.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of kind of being open to the fact that if your child has some challenges, friendships may not look the same way they looked for you. I think this might be particularly difficult um for parents who maybe they were very socially adept and had were always surrounded by a ton of friends. Maybe they had, there were always kids in the house when, like their friends were always spending the night or were always over. And so that I think is a little more challenging for us as parents if we're like, oh, I always had the house filled with all my teammates from football or basketball, whatever the case may be. And my child doesn't do that. Boy, this must be awful for them. But we do know that as long as a child has like one or two, three good friends or, friend social connections, I think that really, really helps them. They have that interaction and that opportunity to have those relationships.
That's true.
Yeah, I love that point because I was really outgoing as a child, and you project that onto your kid. And it also, I turn like I, so last summer was really challenging for my daughter that struggles with anxiety. And she had been surprisingly rather social. I think the pandemic was actually beautiful for her. She loved wearing a mask. She
Mhm.
loved kind of you know, the part-time in person, that really worked for her personality. And so then when she started to recognize her own social battery, which was really great that she even knew that terminology, and she would spend so much time by herself, and it would make me feel like, is something wrong? Are you okay? And I had to really pull back on that because here she was just being aware of what she needed. She was honoring herself. And in my eyes, because I was so social as a kid, I was thinking that something was wrong when she was
Mhm.
just being self aware and giving herself what she needed. So, you know,
Yeah, and I will say one of the things that my mom told me as I was parenting and my kiddos started to get older was she'd say, sometimes you'll see your kids pulling away from friends, and don't push back on that because maybe
yeah,
something's going on that you don't know about, that your child is making a decision to stay away from them for a good reason. And
100%.
now years later, looking back, I was like looking at how some of those people that my children used to hang out with, how that kind of shook out for them. I was glad that I had that advice and that I didn't push it and keep saying like, oh, why don't you invite Susie over, and really kind of push them to stay together. So shout outs to moms who share
Yeah.
that good wisdom with one another. Yep. Peyton, Tara mentioned the social battery tip sheet, and I was kind of thinking about that too. You want to talk just a little bit about that?
Yeah, that is my favorite tip sheet. As someone who struggles with their own social battery. So that is a tip sheet that kind of came together after the first, I know there's been like 100, but like opening of the pandemic, when everyone was starting to realize that they had a social battery, even if they hadn't previously. Like I have very social parents, and even they were like, whoa, like I need a weekend to recoup, like I need what's going on here. So we made the tip sheet, and it has a bunch of tips on how to be kind of your child's ally when it comes to their social battery and be on their team, and start to notice, when the signs of them starting to shut down a little bit, starting to maybe like be close to a meltdown, and giving them the tools to, like Tara said, to isolate if they need to like relax in the way that feels rejuvenating to them. And I love that tip sheet. It's my favorite one.
Yeah, I that kind of brings me to one of the tips that I really like that I think is universal um, for families, for children to be able to use in a bunch of situations, and that's having a family code word. Or phrase. I think that's really useful. So let's say you're at a neighborhood event with a bunch of kiddos around, and your child comes over with one of their friends or another kid in the in the neighborhood, and your child says, "Oh, mom, uh Susie asked if I could spend the night. Do you mind? Is that okay if I spend the night? But I forgot to walk the dog." And that phrase of "I forgot to walk the dog" is the code word for the parent that there's something up. And so the mom or the parent kind of knows, oh, wait, they use that code word. Something's going on. Oh, no, not tonight. We have something planned in the morning. And so if you establish a family code word or phrase, your child and you understand that that means something's up and they need a little bit of parental intervention. And so we hear that often. We hear parents saying to their kids, "You can always call me from anywhere. If you're in a situation and you need me to get you out, you can always call me and I'll come get you, no questions asked." That's great. But then the child may actually have to type in the words, "I need you to come get me," or say it, on the phone, "I need you to come get me." And they may be in a social situation where they don't want to lose face. Maybe their friends are going to go off and do something that they know is probably not something good. And then they can use that code word. "Oh, hey, I'm ready. I can go, but I just have to let my parents know about the dog. Hey, I forgot to walk the dog. Can you walk the dog?" And then the parent knows, then the parent could be the bad guy. "Hey, no, you have to come home and walk the dog. I told you to do that before you left." So whatever that phrase is, as a family, it's nice for you to be able to use that, and you can use that in a bunch of situations anytime they need an out. So it's kind of like this code word that or phrase that you would use in a situation where I need mom or dad to come bail me out, but I can't say it out loud. I can't say, "Hey, they're using drugs here. I'm really not comfortable. There's no parent here like I told you there would be," whatever the case may be. So
That's a
I really like
beautiful
that.
point. That is a beautiful point. And as you were talking, that got me to thinking, I know there's a lot of families I work with, and even my own daughter, who in school settings, they might be struggling with some peer dynamic or whatever. And because with a mental health diagnosis, it might not present like a medical health diagnosis. So some school staff might not be as sensitive to the fact that to regulate this child, they just might need to call home and speak to a parent and hear that reassuring voice, and having um, that safe word. Maybe in front of staff they don't want to say this kid was doing such and such, but you know what I mean, whatever, to let the parent know, this is what was happening, or I'm struggling because of a peer dynamic. Because it, like my daughter she's in the hospital now, and sometimes she doesn't want to talk to staff about certain things, so she'll say, "Can I just call my mom?" And if they don't let her, or there's just specific times, you might have a situation escalate when a parent could have helped regulate that kid. So especially in a school setting, I think about that with kids on, the spectrum, the autism spectrum or whatever, sometimes, and a mom has told me this, there's very simple things I do with my son. And until the school gets on board with that, like he might be overstimulated from other peers in the classroom. They might not fully understand that. And all he needs is just these one, two, three simple things to get him back regulated so he can go back and have fun with his friends. So I think that's something in working with the families and even with ourselves to help the schools to realize in some cases they might need a parent to intervene until they are, knowing better the child.
Yeah, and I think that when your kid is finally invited to the party, right? They're finally there's finally an opening that they've like wiggled their way into with the cool kids, to call their parent and be like, "Could you come get me?" Is they're not going to do that. So, making sure that you have some kind of some kind of word agreement, whatever, if they're ever in a situation. It also gives you that opportunity to really talk about it, which sometimes we don't do, or sometimes we don't do enough. Do you have anything
Uh,
else we want to add?
well, I just had a question. I think the homeschooling situation is so unique for developing friendships, and I wondered how how you navigated that, Cheryl, in terms of knowing where to reach out to people, to kind of get the kids together to expose them socially.
I think as homeschooling parents, there are many forms that takes.
Mhm.
So in some cases, a child might be at home learning, but they are interacting with kids via the platform, the school platform. So in that case, they might establish some connections there. Um, there's a lot of homeschool co-ops um, based upon the varied interests of kids that can present options for socializing. There are even some co-ops who plan trips and stuff like that. So um, I am a very proactive parent, so I'm usually the one planning stuff and trying to link him up with other kids and things like that, and interest led because like we were talking about before, when we are social or we have a certain expectation from how we grow up, we might be pushing our kids down a lane that they're not necessarily inclined to go. So, with my little guy, I notice that sometimes I've got to take a step back and let him lead a little bit, like, okay, I really didn't want to play with Johnny, mommy. Why did you set up that play date? Oh, sorry about that, so communication. I think, Christina, you were talking about that, having conversations, open conversations with our kids, asking them the questions, because it's not always just about us. We might have our expectations, but kids are very different now. And I've been saying that everywhere I go, like their perception on things. So it's important to communicate with them and see, okay, what is it that you actually want? What is it that would be your preference? And let that kind of lead and guide me. But their homeschooling is it's not a novelty like it used to be. So I feel like there's so many more options for social interactions and things like that.
Yeah. I I know a lot of families are choosing homeschooling now because there are so many like cyber charters. So that's different. Cyber charters are different from homeschooling, but just the idea of children being at home for their learning opportunities. And so, I mean, I think that that's nice for children who maybe in that situation where they're being bullied at school or school just doesn't suit them. I think back when we started working on the friendship tip sheet. I think back to a colleague who said to me that their child was sitting at lunch with a group of children, and the mom got word, maybe her son told her, that um, the kids were having him do things at lunch, like put his pizza on his head, and then the kids would laugh. And so I think maybe the way mom found out was, they were having pizza for dinner, and their child was sharing the story about, oh, and they laughed and laughed and laughed, and you know that was the first time mom kind of got wind that, maybe the friendships that her school was talking about her child having at school were not actual friendships, but her child was more like the tag along who they have do stupid things that maybe eventually will get them into trouble. um, because that is something that we have to keep an eye out for our children who may not fully understand social situations. um, so I think that that's where that idea that we are now adding to the ebook of talking about unhealthy friendships and thinking about how do you define those for our children. I think that that's interesting. And then too, being able to kind of talk a little bit about social media and how, you know, think about Facebook, your friends, and the people who are in your Facebook account are people who might just walk right by you if you happen to see them on the street. So I think turning our friendship tip sheets into an ebook really allows us to tap into and grow and add more opportunities and link to other really great resources. Peyton, you want to give us a timeline? When is that? I'm going to put her on the spot. When is that friendship ebook coming out? And what else do we have in terms of plans for ebooks?
So the friendship ebook we're talking about actually today, later today. It's in the draft stage right now. Like the goal is this is ready for back to school, hopefully before. But the time when parents are starting to get back in that mode of like my child will be hopefully making friends at school. So back to school, we also we have an IEP boot camp that we have talked about potentially transforming into an ebook as well. To give parents more of a day of resource if they are having a meeting with their child's IEP team. And we have a bullying tip sheet that we're also looking to expand into an ebook because that is one of the most brought up topics of all the families that call, of the families that reach out for help. So bullying, friendship, and IEP are the three on the calendar.
Yeah, that's great.
Love, love,
And
love, love, love that.
Love to hear that.
and so if our listeners
Hey.
have any suggestions for
Mhm.
future tip sheets, future ebooks, we really crowdsource our information because again, our idea is not to um to like reinvent the wheel. We want
Right.
to gather information that we're able to share from the same information that we would share if we were sitting down with a friend, you know. So if our listeners have any suggestions on tip sheets or ebooks they'd like to see, we would love them to kind of leave us that information or reach out to us. And
Mhm.
I guess that's it. That's all we've got for today. So thanks everybody for joining us and have a great day.